DC hasn't exactly had the smoothest decade. I mean, if you told me 10 years ago that we'd go from Batman versus Superman to all of this, I'd think you're insane. And here we are. We're finally, against all odds, in a place where the DC universe is back on track. Not perfectly, but in a way that actually makes you want to care about it again. The last decade of DC filmmaking is interesting. Like, you could see the ambition, sure, the tone, the pacing, and the moral messaging were all constantly at war with each other, but, like, there was ambition there. And now, for the first time in years, the pieces actually feel like they belong in the same universe. Why are Superman and the Batman suddenly making DC feel more coherent? And how do these two opposite films, like completely opposite tonally, story-wise, all of that completely opposite, manage to coexist without collapsing under their own stylistic weight? When you step back and look at the pattern, what you see is a studio finally learning restraint and rediscovering tone, and maybe most importantly, remembering that spectacle means nothing without sincerity. Before we talk about the revival, we need to talk about where DC was, or more accurately, where it was stumbling around in the dark. Let's start with Man of Steel in 2013. It's important to acknowledge that the film had vision. Zack Snyder wasn't phoning it in. He wanted to reimagine Superman as a Christ-like alien burdened by modern cynicism. The problem was the movie kind of treated that with a mystic solemnity that smothered any warmth at all. Everything was shot through like desaturated filters, dialogues delivered like scripture, and action sequences rendered with like operatic slow motion and sonic booms that screamed epic even when the emotional stakes were barely clear. Batman vs. Superman in 2016 was a bold idea on paper. The ideological clash between a god and just some dude in a mask. It was it it worked in theory, but in practice it's questionable. Every frame wanted to be iconic and none of it connected. And I don't think it was that audiences were unwilling to engage with darkness. It was that the film confused that with depth. Suicide Squad was a film that, if you squint, you can see the fingerprints of like 5 different conflicting studio notes. It's as if DC decided to watch Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy and make basically the exact same film, but less emotionally coherent and sort of neon, really neon. The first act was all exposition, the second act was a music video, and the third act was like so not worth the time spent on the other acts. The tone swung between like edgy grit and then cartoonish irreverence, like so much that it gave audiences emotional whiplash. You could feel the film trying to be fun, but every joke felt like it was written by someone who had never ever heard a joke before. And then came Justice League, and what started as Snyder's sort of mythic tragedy ended as Josh Whedon's quippy group therapy session. And the film was literally two visions welded together with panic edits and too much CGI. By this point, the DC universe had developed a reputation, and not the good kind. Tonal inconsistency had become its brand identity. Every project felt like it was trying to correct the last one, like swinging pendulously between grimdark epic and downright stupid. There was ambition, always ambition, but no organizing principle and no unified vision. And I think audiences were tired, and critics had given up trying to make sense of the universe's internal logic, and even die-hard fans were swinging between defending Snyder's operatic grandeur and begging the studio for something with emotional clarity. But then something shifted, and instead of chasing Marvel's tonal uniformity, they finally leaned into atmosphere and character and directorial identity. You could feel the recalibration beginning, the patience to let a story breathe, the willingness to let silence replace this bombast, and the return of emotional coherence. That's where the Batman and Superman come in, not as isolated hits, but as case studies in creative course correction. Let's start with the Batman. Matt Reeves' Take is a slow burn thriller that trades in mood and texture rather than spectacle and quips. The cinematography by Greg Fraser is a masterclass in visual storytelling. Gotham is legibly dark. This is chiaroscuro done with purpose. The city is perpetually slick with rain and grime and bathed in sodium yellows and red neons. It's oppressive and claustrophobic, but it's hypnotically beautiful, and Fraser's use of shallow focus and long lenses give the film a voyeuristic quality. It's not there to glorify Batman, it's there to study him. I think Reeves often holds on to moments that other superhero movies would cut away from, so instead of punchlines, we get like very, very long pauses, and its pacing is a character study within itself. And the camera follows Batman not as a spectacle, but as a sort of detective. The low camera movement mirrors his like cautious psychology, and when he walks through a crime scene, the silence is deafening. Gotham itself deserves a dissertation. Reeves' Gotham feels like the natural evolution of Blade Runner's Los Angeles or Seven City. It's industrial and decaying, and it's like perpetually midnight. The production design by James Chinland also creates this like visual ecosystem. The costume design also follows suit. It's gritty and it's utilitarian and it's grounded, and Batman's suit looks functional to an extent. It's not like theatrical. You can see like the scuff marks and the weird lines and the imperfections, and it makes it tactile. I think that's what grounds it all, is its physicality. Gotham is a tactile space. The commitment to texture and realism is what rebuilt audiences' trust. After years of the DCU looking like a hyper-stylized fever dream of conflicting color palettes and tonal spasms, the Batman feels disciplined. It doesn't overreach, and it knows its scale, and it knows its genre. Robert Pattinson's Batman isn't like a god, he's a recluse or an incel loser. The film's genius is that it recenters Batman as detective first, and the superheroism comes second, and that's pretty cool considering the time we're in. We've all got the attention spans of goldfish at this point. The brooding isn't ornamental. It's like diagnostic, and it reveals obsession and loneliness and self-doubt, and every choice feels psychologically motivated. He's less of a vigilante and more of a man drowning in his own weird pit of depression and moral code. The narrative pacing also mirrors this internal world. It's not built around escalating set pieces, but around revelation and decay. Each clue doesn't like move the plot forward, it just deepens our understanding of corruption, both systemic and personal. The film's emotional rhythm feels closer to a Fincher thriller than a superhero blockbuster. Tone too is crucial in that Reeves commits to the melancholy without the irony. The film's darkness isn't performative, it's atmospheric and it's almost meditative, and it's about the cost of obsession, the futility of vengeance, and the thin line between justice and control, and what makes it land is consistency. The tone never breaks. There's no awkward joke to cut the tension, no forced levity to balance things out. The film trusts its audience to sit with this and absorb it. That tonal integrity, combined with coherent world building and visual sophistication, is what makes The Batman so important to the DC's revival. It proved that the audience can reject confusion rather than darkness. Reeves shows that it can be grim without being incoherent, and serious without being self-serious. And visually, this film is a clean break from DC's past mistakes. Compare it to Justice League, where Snyder's compositions felt operatic and artificial. Reeves are intimate and grounded. Compare it to The Suicide Squad, where the film felt like a very colourful mess at best, and the Batman uses colour very deliberately and very meaningfully, and every shot contributes to the story's emotional stakes. The Batman rebuilt credibility, not by chasing Marvel or nostalgia, but by reclaiming cinematic craft that they clearly had before, but were just super blurry. It reminded people that superhero movies can still feel like cinema. In short, Gotham is alive, Batman is believable, and for the first time in a very long time, DC feels like it knows exactly what it's doing. If the Batman is brooding, noir, and super wet, then Superman is its perfect counterpoint. Luminous, sincere, and a bit mythic. It's not that it's brighter, but it understands why it's bright. From the very first frame, the cinematography announces a tonal and philosophical shift, and gone is the grayscale of the Snyder era. It is a very bright movie. The film opens in daylight, a very real daylight, with a shit ton of snow for it to bounce off of, and Superman isn't hidden in shadows or emerging from ruin. He's framed within this deep contrast against a white background. Fraser's chiaroscuro in The Batman gives us tension, and Henry Braham gives us harmony. Color becomes narrative grammar. The palette leans into a painterly triad of blues and reds and golds, and not in the flat comic way we've seen before, but the saturation has discipline and is balanced and intentional. Blues signal calm and moral order, reds hint at emotion and humanity, and gold brings us divinity. Together they form a language of optimism, one that tells us Superman's strength isn't brute force but moral conviction. It's elegant and almost a subconscious metaphor for his symbolic function. Superman also uses space as storytelling. Unlike Gotham's vertical claustrophobia, Gotham is rendered as open and breathable and structured. Architectural symmetry dominates this space, with glass and steel arranged in order and light flooding through skylines. The camera often pulls back, giving Superman room to exist within the frame rather than dominate it. He's contextualized within his world rather than being isolated above it. Even the interiors reflect this ideology. The Daily Planet's newsroom, for example, isn't just a set, it's more of a symbolic environment. Clean lines and natural lighting and movement-heavy blocking creates this rhythm of transparency and collaboration. Contrast this with the Wayne Tower interiors, where it's dark and static and solitary. Bruce lives in rooms that swallow him. Clark thrives in spaces that open outwards. The mise-en-scène visualizes two philosophies of heroism, one rooted in isolation and other in participation. Narratively, Superman's emotional arc mirrors this clarity. He isn't like a tortured god or an alien struggling to find humanity. He is human, and the film isn't afraid to let that be enough. His moral clarity doesn't make him naive, it makes him courageous. The emotional stakes feel tangible, and every act of heroism carries this social, relational, and existential weight. The pacing reflects this, and it kind of breathes in that conversations linger and moments of flight are followed by moments of stillness, giving the spectacle emotional texture. What's crucial here is the tone, in that Reeves' Batman found discipline in darkness, and Gunn's Superman finds it in sincerity. The film commits to earnestness without being ironic, and that's radical in 2025, when most superhero films immediately default to dumb jokes as emotional defense mechanisms. Here, sincerity is like the rebellion. The optimism isn't nostalgia, it's an active aesthetic choice. Hope is framed as resistance and not naivety. And I think this is what makes the film such an essential tonal counterpoint. By placing the Batman's brooding introspection alongside Superman's sunlight, the DCU establishes a cinematic dialect. Two moral languages coexisting without collapsing into tonal chaos. It's a creative risk that pays off so well because both films are coherent in their own aesthetic choice, their own aesthetic logic. Each film trusts its tone completely, and that's what the Snyder era missed. It confused seriousness with depth when what the audience actually want is coherence. Even the spectacle works differently. There's scale, but it's composed with restraint. Camera moves with elegance, not aggression. When Superman flies, the emphasis isn't on the power of that, but perspective. The wide shots reveal the world he's trying to protect, not just the strength that he has. It's subtle, but it's a profound way of reframing what superheroic even means. This tonal revitalization has done something that no DC film has managed to do in years, and that it bridges spectacle and sincerity, and it proves that optimism isn't antithetical to artistic integrity. Together with The Batman, it signals a creative ecosystem that finally understands contrast as strength and not contradiction. So if the Batman rebuilt this foundation of trust, I think Superman is the first skyscraper of belief. Is the cinematic embodiment of basically everything that DC forgot while Snyder was in charge. DC's revival isn't just confined to the big screen though. It's not just about visual spectacle anymore, it's about tone management and authorial confidence and, crucially, character work. And if the Batman and Superman are twin cinematic pillars of this new era, then Peacemaker, specifically season 1, is the keystone to holding them together. On paper, Peacemaker Should Not Work is a spin off of The Suicide Squad, a film that had an interesting reception. The protagonist is a jingoistic, hyper-violent man-child whose whole deal is killing in the name of peace. It sounds like a parody, and Gunn takes that premise and turns it into a surprisingly sophisticated exploration of guilt and ideology and emotional repression. Peacemaker succeeds because it's unapologetically character first. Beneath the absurdity, there's a genuine psychological through line. Gunn structures the show around emotional revelation rather than plot propulsion. The show takes a character that should be utterly irredeemable and forces us to see his contradictions, his need for validation, his suppressed grief, his learned violence. And that's exactly what DC's films have been missing for years, emotional specificity. Gunn also brings his directorial signature to the small screen. Peacemaker's mise-en-scène is deceptively clever in that it has garish colour palettes, and those fluorescent pinks and metallic blues are both comedy and critique. They contrast the ugliness of the character's actions with a deliberately cartoonish visual world. It's almost Brechtian in its self-awareness. The aesthetics remind you that you're watching something heightened, even as the emotions remain painfully real. And the camera work is surprisingly controlled for a show like this chaotic. Gunn often uses handheld motion during emotional confrontations. They're intimate and restless, and framing that mirrors the instability of Peacemaker's mind. In these moments of absurdity, the camera then locks into these static wide shots, and it's wildly uncomfortable. It's tonal whiplash that actually works. But what really sets Peacemaker apart is its tonal precision. It walks a tightrope between dark comedy and genuine pathos. The humor doesn't negate the pain, and it kind of coexists with it. The show's funniest scenes often land the hardest because they emerge directly from the characters. Gunn understands that it isn't about balance, but it's about purpose, and when you cut from a tragic confession to an awkward dance number, it's not inconsistency, it's catharsis through absurdity. I think this tonal dexterity mirrors the larger shift in DC's creative strategy. For the first time in a decade, DC is no longer terrified of tonal variety. Peacemaker proves that the DCU doesn't need to homogenize itself to be coherent. Gotham can be drenched in greys, Metropolis can shine in idealism, and in a small-town TV show about a violent himbo with a pet eagle, it can still feel like it belongs in the same creative universe. Cohesion isn't about sameness, it's about integrity of vision. And Peacemaker's integrity is all over its writing. The dialogue is profane but philosophical, vulgar but surprisingly vulnerable. Characters are constantly self-interrogating through jokes, weaponizing humor for basically everything at this point. Gunn's script structure allows for tangents that seem comedic but ultimately fold back into character psychology. It's rare that superhero property uses banter as emotional camouflage rather than filler. Even thematically, Peacemaker is doing heavy lifting for the larger DCU revival. It's about moral ambiguity, what it means to believe in peace through violence, and how ideology can be both a shield and a wound. By interrogating those ideas through comedy, the show disarms audiences who are tired of serious darkness but still want substance. It's the Batman's psychological realism and Superman's emotional sincerity blended through chaos and hair metal. We have to talk about season 2. We just have to. It's fine. It's not bad. It's fine. You can feel the creative fatigue. The character arcs that felt razor sharp in season 1 start to blur. The emotional beats don't land quite the same, and the energy is still there. It's still Peacemaker. It's still the show. But the precision isn't. Like, it's completely gone. I mean, Gunn was probably writing Superman at the same time, so it's It's forgivable, some compromises were inevitable. But even with its uneven second act, Peacemaker remains essential to DC's current creative identity. It was proof that the universe could expand through tone and not despite it. It showed executives and audiences that character-driven storytelling could survive the jump from cinematic gravitas to serialized storytelling without losing depth. In that sense, Peacemaker can be seen as a prototype. It's DC learning how to play multiple instruments again after years of trying to outshoot Marvel. So, what do all of these examples, the Batman, Superman, and Peacemaker, actually tell us about DC's creative revival? If you zoom out, a clear pattern forms, not just in the tone or storytelling, but in philosophy. These aren't isolated successes, they're variations on a unified creative model, grounded characters, coherent world building, and bold tonal commitment. The Batman gives us obsession, rendered through method, and Superman offers moral clarity tested by empathy. Peacemaker is denial personified through absurdity. These are no longer archetypes. They're case studies in emotional architecture. Each one functions as both a mirror and a critique of heroism itself, and the audience doesn't just watch them but recognizes that. Coherence of world building is also clearly very important as well. Gotham's claustrophobic shadows feel diseased, Metropolis glows with structural optimism, and Peacemaker's evergreen is garish and overexposed. Reflecting moral confusion through lighting alone, these worlds aren't just backdrops, they're psychological extensions of the protagonists. And also, I'm glad that color is back in TV because I was so bored of beige. Then there's the tonal courage. DC finally stopped trying to be everything for everyone all the time, and each property leans harder into its chosen genre and commits to the bit. By refusing tonal compromise, the DCU has accidentally stumbled into tonal coherence, and that conviction extends into its craft. These works share a common discipline in how they're built. Framing, composition, and sound design all serve emotional intent. In The Batman, long takes and chiaroscuro lighting translate vigilance into visual form. Superman uses directional lighting and symmetrical composition to make it all feel very architectural, and Peacemaker weaponizes garish color and diegetic music to externalize chaos. I think the most important thing about this all is that the approach lands because it speaks to a cultural moment. The endless irony, the weightless spectacle, and the franchise fatigue. What people want are films that take them seriously without taking themselves too seriously. And that's why this revival works. DC has learned from its chaos and turned that chaos into texture. The studio finally trusts its directors to have a voice, and its films to have an identity, and its characters to have flaws. In short, this is DC's blueprint, grounded in psychology and coherent worlds, tonal boldness, and precision craft. The result isn't just better films, it's recalibrated cinematic language. DC has stopped trying to fix itself and started speaking in its own dialect again. Surprisingly, or well, not that surprisingly if you've been paying attention, people are pretty happy with this. Critics who'd written the obituary for the DCEU years ago suddenly started using words like confident and elegant and cinematically mature. The Batman was praised for its visual discipline and psychological texture, a noir that remembers why noir matters. Superman was celebrated for its reclamation of sincerity in such a cynical age, restoring optimism without the irony. And with Peacemaker, critics were all over the first season. Not so much the second season, but the first season. I don't think the films have changed too much. I think it's the trust is what changed. Audience finally believe that DC knows where it's going. The confidence comes from clarity and clear tone and clear narrative and clear craft. And when viewers can sense intent behind every camera move, costume, line of dialogue, it's something to invest in. And crucially, this positive response ties directly back to its stylistic and narrative principles we've been unpacking. Cohesive mise-en-scène isn't just an aesthetic flourish, it creates emotional continuity. Intentional framings tell audience how to feel before anyone speaks. Tonal identity makes the story readable and legible. When those elements align, you get something DCEU never quite achieved before, which is emotional literacy. Yeah, critics were impressed, fans are engaged, and social media is shockingly less of a war zone. DC's revival isn't just a filmmaking success. I think it's more of a cultural one. It proves that audiences respond to coherence, sincerity, and risk taking as well. And turns out if you stop chasing trends and start trusting craft, the people noticed and they show up, and it's great. DC's revival isn't about a single movie or a single director or single vision at this point. It's about an alignment of visual mastery, tonal coherence, and character-driven storytelling across these mediums. It's about remembering that superheroes are cultural myths, and they need to be told that way. Gotham's noir shadows and Metropolis's golden light and the chaotic sincerity of Peacemaker all prove the same thing. When DC trusts its filmmakers, shit actually starts to look good, and spectacle serves a story, emotion drives action, and tone finally feels intentional.